Past traumas, especially those experienced during childhood, scientifically are now proven to leave profound scars that influence our behaviors and responses throughout life, and especially as adults. The thing about childhood traumas and patterns of neglect is that they don't start with you. The childhood trauma or the wounded inner child, as many of us know it, is one of the most common patterns in our ancestral lineage that, because of the lack of healing and therapy, continues to repeat itself with generations before and after. While understanding these wounds is essential, which we've talked about here in the last couple of podcast episodes, understanding the wounded inner child, what we also need is solutions. What we need is the power of Kundalini yoga meditation, which introduces an intriguing yet very precise path to healing, reshaping, and reimagining a healthier self by addressing the root cause of the inner child wounds, which are impacted the heaviest, which include the brain and the nervous system. Today, we're going to look at how to heal the wounded inner child at the level of the DNA by addressing the brain and the nervous system. And we're going to discover also how Kundalini Yoga meditation is a beacon of light for those seeking to embrace and to nurture their wounded inner child and to disrupt the pattern of childhood trauma in their lives. And Satnam, beautiful Sovereign Women, Satnam, and welcome to the Sovereign Women Movement podcast, where it is our mission to disrupt ancestral karmic patterns of intergenerational karmic and emotional pain by getting to the root cause, by healing the nervous system and rewiring our brains. Welcome, and it's an honor to be here with all of you on the sacred day as we are continuing the discussion this week on inner child wounding. I know that it is a very heavy subject, but when you start to realize just how vital and how important it is for us to address these wounds, because if they literally play out in our day-to-day lives, I think most of us can agree that it becomes urgent. It becomes a matter that needs to be dealt with immediately. But the problem is that most of us don't realize that we're literally just acting out of our childhood wounds, which is why I spent a couple of days in the last two podcast episodes explaining to you, first astrologically and then spiritually yesterday, how our childhood wounds unconsciously create rage and anger within us that, even though we're not expressing it or projecting it, that shows up as energy leakages, which then force us to move into this consciousness of, I need to get revenge or justice, which only creates energy leaks within our body, mind, and spirit. Instead of using our emotions for creation, what we're doing is we're using them for destruction, which is not something that we want to do at all. And today I want to go deeper into this. I want to now share with you the biophysical, the science of what happens to you as a child when you go through these traumatic experiences. And more importantly, the solution. How are we going to fix this, right? How are we going to actually heal? So before we get started, let's talk a little bit about how childhood trauma impacts us at the level of the physical body, at the level of the brain and the nervous system. And it actually starts, of course, before we're even birthed. Before we're in birth it. It starts in our mom's womb. As our mom is pregnant, it is now proven by science that maternal stress during pregnancy can have lasting effects on your physical and mental health, on your childhood as well as your adulthood. There's this really interesting study that I heard the other day too, that women who basically lived in an environment with a lot of stress have this really high probability that the child is going to be born premature. But those women that actually live in a situation where the husband is highly stressed out, the probability of them having premature labor like almost quadruples. Because as women, we take on the problems of everyone else, but especially our partners, whether we're doing that consciously or unconsciously, which is why we also have women now that have a higher rate of immune disease because of the fact that we're empaths that don't know how to protect our energy pretty much. And when it comes to pregnancy, your nervous system is literally being programmed inside of the womb of your mom, and your mom's nervous system was programmed in the womb of your mom. So as you can see, these programs, whether it was a lot of stress, a lot of abuse, or maybe there was nurturing and love, whatever that was happening around them, your emotional pain and your behavioral responses to that emotional pain actually start developing when mom is pregnant with you. Now, when you're actually born, we talked a little bit about yesterday. Well, what happens? How does someone with inner child wounding act? The low self worth, the low self esteem, promiscuity, sexual dysfunction, um, just ego all the way, where you're identified to a story of trauma, of neglect, of abandonment, which then causes you to act like an immature adult child. That's really what we are dealing with in this realm. Like, but what it does to us physically is even deeper, and it's scientifically proven, which is why today's pharmaceuticals and modern day medicine will never be able to heal us. You see, what really becomes impacted through this childhood trauma pattern is our brain and our nervous system. Now, to start off with the brain, we know that it doesn't have to be physical trauma. You getting physically abused or sexually abused is just as impactful as the emotional trauma that I talked about yesterday in the podcast episode. So go check it out here in the previous video. But in essence, those words, that lack of, because your mom was depressed and she couldn't give you the love she wanted to give you, that in itself creates fractured nervous system. It creates a fractured brain because emotional trauma creates changes in the brain that basically trigger the fight or flight response, which is our nervous system, sympathetic mode versus parasympathetic mode. And so you're like in this situation where if you've lived under a lot of stress, or where your parents were always fighting, or there was some type of emotional abuse, there's areas of the brain that stop working. The amygdala, which is this almond like shaped like gland, literally stops working when you go through this emotional trauma. So then you could be 20 years later down the road at work and you're triggered by a memory of the trauma, and all of a sudden your body is 5 years old again, thinking that you're back in trauma. So the responses are biochemical, but they can also stimulate a lot of different other stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol that are released even without you being in that environment or even without you knowing. So over time, this process can lead to serious neurological changes, and of course, very serious changes to the nervous system and dysfunctionality. Early life experiences shape the development of the brain, the circuitry, which is the flow of energy that moves through the brain that keeps it nice and healthy, which is why when we look at the brains of childhood or children that have gone through childhood trauma, they could be 9 years old. And yet, we're scanning their veins and all of a sudden their brains look like they're 90 years old. So it has a lot to do with physical deterioration, with hormonal deterioration, with specifically the frontal cortex being impacted the most, which is what gives us a state of compassion and allows us to feel connected and build intimate relationships. That goes out the door. So because that goes out the door, you better believe, you're not going to be compassionate as an adult. It's like why you wonder hurt people would hurt other people, but it is literally because of that, because the brain development was basically obstructed. It was supposed to, your brain is supposed to develop in a beautiful environment. All of a sudden there's your primary caregivers are not making you feel safe or nurtured. Then what happens? Your developing brains literally, they stop growing, they stop evolving, and instead they basically adapt to programs of survival. So your learning is going to be way more difficult, which is why intelligence is impacted. Everything is impacted with this. And there's even brain imaging studies of children with documented cases of maltreatment that actually start to reveal the brain structure dysfunctioning, and how that abuse and neglect and that exposure to trauma has created these changes in the brain that really can lead to, again, like the delayed speech, reading ability, or even being ready for school. So specifically the areas associated with the brain and childhood trauma have a lot to do, like I mentioned, with the prefrontal cortex. And it also has a lot to do with areas of the brain that go gray and versus areas of the brain that are white. And when studies looked at these brains, they reported experiences with childhood trauma where the brain had a lot more gray area, gray matter, which was causing a lot of the fogginess and a lot of the emotional reactions that we have as adults to how we behave because of our survival instinct that we think we're always under because the amygdala is not working. So the brain, because it's connected to our limbic system, which is connected to the nervous system, impacts, of course, how our nervous system functions or dysfunctions after we go through trauma. Because biologically, trauma has been shown to impact the brain's limbic system, it is responsible for behavioral and emotional responses. It's involved in the autonomic nervous system response that we feel when we sense danger, right? The fight and flight. So, in other words, it's our survival instinct that gets impacted when we talk about the nervous system. There's a doctor whose name is Stephen Porges, which is somebody who talks and highlights a lot about the Polyvagal Theory, which is something that I learn a lot about in Kundalini Yoga Therapy School. But the Polyvagal Theory is an important feature of this autonomic nervous system. Basically, when you find yourself in a life-threatening event, you freeze or you fold, the response is triggered, right? So this is important to highlight for anyone who has been physically attacked but was unable to fight back or scream or emotionally attack. Because this evolutionary trait, it flips the dorsal mode to freeze or fold in order to help us survive in life in a life-threatening event, which then shuts down the nervous system protection and includes dropping the metabolic rate in your body and can definitely immobilize the body. So with the polyvagal theory, what is known is that if you can exercise the polyvagal, which is a gland, which is a hormone, which is a component, I would call it, within our system, then you're able to really learn to assess and heal from these fight and flight fears. And there's no pill, there's no shortcut to strengthening the polyvagal. In fact, the only thing that has been found to actually heal and increase our polyvagal tone, which heals everything else, is meditation. Which is why, as much as we know and scientists explain how much our brain and our nervous system become deteriorated through childhood exposure of trauma, we also have solution because evidence suggests through neuroplasticity, which is the ability for the brain to regrow itself, that meditation especially can stimulate changes in the brain or the neuroplasticity, which then fosters literal structural growth in the hippocampus, in the amygdala, and especially in these areas of the brain that are vital for memory, which include the hippocampus. Now, meditation contributes also to stress reduction. So instead of running on cortisol all day because you still think you're in that traumatic experience, now you release less cortisol because you're not under stress. So you're releasing the hormones in your body that actually heal your body. So what happens with stress reduction is that it boosts also our memory performance and it helps through all of those harmful effects that the stress hormones of the brain and cortisol have done. And through meditation, it is actually shown that we enhance our working memory capacity so that we don't go back to that PTSD. So that this is a crucial part of the cognitive function of your brain. The reason why we keep retracting back to those painful memories is because we haven't expanded the memory capacity of the brain. It still thinks it's in that predicament, right? Meditation has been found to stimulate several changes in the brain, which is what is known as neuroplasticity, which then develops the ability to create an active prefrontal cortex, which is crucial for the passion or the feelings of compassion. But what it does is that it helps us literally create new neurons in the brain. So if you have more neurons in the brain, it's like a computer that has more power, more energy to process all of the information that is actually moving through the system, right? Whether it's information from now or whether it's memories from a long time ago. In fact, there are MRI scans that are taken before and after meditation and how they show and reflect how the gray area that's created to emotional trauma starts to dissipate, but more importantly, how there's areas of the brain that actually start to restructure themselves, that actually start to grow new neurons in the actual brain. But ma'am, and thank you so much for joining us. How are you, Jen? It's so good to see you and connect with you here live, talking about the brain, the nervous system, and childhood healing. And so, as it relates to Kundalini Yoga meditation, there are specific, because it's very, very precise. One of the things we need to understand about childhood trauma is that not only does it damage the brain, but it also damages the nervous system. But where we store that physically in the body, because the body that keeps score, is actually known as what is known as the lung meridians. So in Chinese medicine, as well as Kundalini Yoga therapy, as a therapist, we learn about these 12 meridians. And these 12 meridians are basically energy lines that allow the energy to flow, that connect to every single organ in your body, that connect to every function of your body. So whenever you are having a pain in your foot, let's say on your right toe, there is a reason deeper than that. There's an emotional connection to that. That also, that meridian line is connected to maybe your liver, or connected maybe to your heart, or connected maybe to your kidneys. Everything in the body is connected. And when we're having a problem, this is why people struggle so much with modern healthcare system, because they have physical pain and they go and they look at the area where the pain is, and they look at the symptoms, but they don't look at how the body, mind, and spirit are all connected. So you might be having a pain in the toe, but the real issue is in your kidneys, but it is now showing up in the toe. So this is the same for the meridian lines as it relates to trauma. When we're talking about childhood trauma, the area where we carry childhood trauma is in the lung meridians. So many of the meditations, but particularly the meditation that I shared with you here on my YouTube channel, which is to heal the inner, or the wounded inner child, to heal from childhood traumatic patterns. What you'll notice from the meditation is that the way we place our hands up, creating a triangle with the mudra, which is the way we position our hands. I explained in last week's podcast episode the difference between mudra, which is how we position our body, breath, frequency of chanting, what all those different things as part of Kundalini Yoga do to the brain and to the nervous system. But for example, this meditation, which you can go check out in my YouTube channel here below, the inner child meditation works specifically with our arms. And the reason that a lot of the meditations in Kundalini work with arms, or you having to hold your arms in a position for a long period of time, 3, 5 minutes, 11 minutes, is because the arms are connected specifically to the lung meridians. And the lung meridians is where we carry these childhood trauma. And because Kundalini Yoga is a precise science of energy, if you are basically blocked through these childhood traumas, you can practice a specific meditation that then allows you to clear that from the system. Now, there's, of course, it depends on how deep of a childhood trauma pattern you're carrying. If it's something that has been in your generation for more than 7 generations, all of that is not related to time, but more impact and mindfulness as you start to do your practice. There's also different equivalents of frequencies of time. For example, what happens to your subconscious mind, your brain, and to your nervous system when you practice meditation for 40 days versus 90 days versus 120 days, or versus 1,000 days consistently. If you're someone that is dealing with a lot of patterns of childhood trauma, it's not just sexual abuse, there was physical abuse, there was emotional abuse, there was abuse of all kinds, then perhaps you are someone that's going to need to take this meditation a little bit longer than the 40 days. There are science now updates that have shown us the impact of just the 40-day meditation practice on the brain and the nervous system that are going to be completely life-changing. But you get to assess that as your own healer, as your own holistic doctor, in deciding when it is time to basically let go of the meditation and stop doing it and maybe move on to another one, or do it for a longer practice period. My sadhana practice has changed over the years, but right now, what I'm specifically, for a very long time, the only meditation that I was practicing was the ancestral karma meditation and the inner childhood wound healing meditation. And I did that sadhana practice, which sadhana is your daily spiritual practice, for more than it's probably over 2 years. And in the last, because I've been practicing Kundalini yoga for 5 years, in the last 2 to 3 years, it's changed and fluctuated. Like right now, what my daily set meditation practices is I wake up at 3:45 in the morning. We have a daily virtual meditation space for my community, the Sovereign Women Academy, where they are welcome to join for daily intuitive guidance, life coaching, as well as to practice their meditation. And they're not forced to join me for 2.5 hours, although some women do. Women that said they would never wake up that early. I see them now waking up and joining me at 3:45 at 4 a.m., which is absolutely amazing. Shout out to you, you know who you are. But most of them will join me for their 11 minutes anytime between the window of 3:45 a.m. and 6:30 a.m. Mountain Standard Time. But for me right now, my current practice does not include a childhood healing meditation because I've graduated from that. I did a lot of healing work around that, a lot of healing work around the mother womb, which that's what helps develop during the meditation. So now my current practice is I chant Longa Kumpars, which is a sacred sound frequency that you learn in the academy as well. That is literally like your connection to God. Like literally, this is your, you have a lot of hurt children with a lot of trauma that have grown up to be adults that are creating war right now. And they have this concept of God as a raging, angry God that is telling them to now go hurt innocent people. Some people, especially through trauma, become jaded. They don't believe in God anymore. They don't love God because they feel God is punishing them. So the big shift in consciousness when you have a daily spiritual practice like I do is that my relationship to myself and to God completely changed. I see God not as a king that sits on a throne with laws. I see God as a loving mother, a loving father that is here to protect me and that loves all of us, the white sheep, the black sheep, the sheep that go far away from home, and the ones that stay close. When you start to do this spiritual practice, which is what Longa Omkar's mantra is, it's a connection to the divine. It's a phone line where you get to connect deeply to this aspect of the divinity, which no one can describe in words. Then what happens is you start to heal so many other aspects of your life. But I'm practicing that meditation with the billionaire's mantra right now. That is very, very powerful and potent as it relates to true prosperity. And then I practice other meditations with the community as they come and go. So my sadhana practice has changed because it's not that healing is forever. It is that the evolution of my soul is forever. Your purpose ultimately is not here to heal. Your purpose is here to self-actualize, to self-realize as God herself, experiencing herself through you. It's for you to really understand what our brother Jesus Christ came to do here, which was he came as a teacher to show us resurrection and that life is forever eternal, not the savage suffering of crucifixion and sin, which is what keeps us in the illusion of separation from God. So your sadhana practice will change as you evolve because ultimately what your purpose is to self-realize. And you allow the Kundalini energy, which is your own white tantric energy that sits coiled at the bottom root of your spine. This is your own medicine cabinet. We don't need anything in the outer world to heal ourselves, especially as it relates to mental health. Like modern medicine is great for like surgeries, emergency things like that. But if you're some mental health, it is completely lost and broken because there is no pill, there is no shortcut to healing yourself, body, mind, and spirit, especially as it relates to childhood trauma, addiction, depression, and toxic relationships, which are the four most common patterns that we actually repeat. So what I welcome you to do is to check out this meditation on healing the inner child and to actually start to practice it. And you can start with 3 minutes, take it up to 5 minutes, take it up to 11 minutes max, and keep the consistency for 40 days. And I want you to journal what happens during the 40 days because the magic and the awareness and the healing doesn't just happen in your meditation spot. It actually happens throughout your day because as you start to meditate and you start to change the frequency of the subconscious mind thought patterns, your outer world is going to change. It's going to reflect to you what is happening in here. And that's a gift. And it is also something that can set us back because remember, it's like going into a hotel with a lot of rooms that we haven't entered into many of the rooms before. We got to move the cobwebs and we got to learn to face these aspects of ourselves which have not been integrated, which ultimately is what the inner child, wounded inner child is those aspects of our childhood, whether it was a traumatic experience that you absolutely remember, or whether it was a series of things like abandonment, like lack of or neglect from mom or dad because they were depressed themselves, whatever it is, it's not even important to figure out what was the reason you have this inner childhood wounding. What's important is to do the inner work, to change the brain, to change the nervous system, and to get to the root cause, which is at the level of the DNA. Only in that way will we be able to heal 7 generations before us and 7 generations after us. So if you do not want generations after you to go through the same childhood patterns that you went through yourself, it is not enough for you to say, I will never be like my mother. I will never be like my father. I will never be like my grandmother. That is not enough. In fact, the more you say that, the more you become that. What's important for us is to heal the nervous system, rewire the brain so that we can get to the root cause and disrupt the pattern at the root cause. Now, I know this week has been heavier because of the subject matter of childhood trauma. I know it's something that is not necessarily something that we want to always talk about. But I assure you that by bringing these topics to the light, we're not only disrupting the pattern, we're bringing healing to ourselves and to our lineage. So I want to thank you all for your courage. I want to thank you all for all the great questions and comments you've left me. I will get back to all of them, I promise you. But I want to say, of course, that if you have any other questions or ideas, you can always private message me, or you can also leave a comment here below and let me know how this resonates for you. Thank you so much for an amazing week. I'm excited for next week's topic. We're getting close to also the eclipse that's coming up, the lunar eclipse in Taurus, the last one for quite a few years in the Taurus Scorpio axis, which is symbolizing a huge cycle closing. So on Monday, I'll be back to share with you how to prepare for the eclipse, how to prepare for Dia de los Muertos, which is coming up too, in honoring our ancestors, and for Halloween, which for many people, I don't necessarily celebrate it, but this can be a portal that can be used in dark forces that we need to be also prepared for. So thank you again for you. I'll see you again next week.